happen. All right, so we're going to invite onto the show here James Corbett. You're going to know him from Corbett Report, the Corbett Report. And we're going to talk to him about, I'm actually very interested. Recently, he had Roger Ver on to talk about voluntarism, that kind of thing.
Good stuff.
That's kind of cool. James Corbett, he's been in Japan since 2004. He has edited over 1,000 hours of audio and video media for the website CorbettReport.com. He produces video reports for GRTV. His work has been carried online by a wide variety of websites. Video productions are broadcast on the Next News Network, and his videos have garnered over 15 million views on YouTube alone. So, Mr. Corbett, thank you very kindly for joining us today. It is a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I should update that because I think it's approaching 17 or maybe 18 million by now, so it's a bit out of date.
Goodness,
Good
people
stuff,
have
man.
seen what you've done. That's really cool. Okay, James, where do we want to start? Because recently there's been Benghazi. I know that you are well educated on that, and I have really not been paying attention to that at all. So you know what?
Yeah,
Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, let's do that.
So, James, give me an overview for the ignorant among us. You know, basically people like me. Tell me what the Benghazi situation was when it started, and kind of an overview of how it's evolved since that point.
That's right, because as people who have been keeping their eyes on the news wires probably know, it has once again crept up into the news. So it's a good time to go back and refresh ourselves if we were following it at the time, or maybe to get into it in the first place. But basically, Benghazi is the second largest city in Libya. It has a population around 670,000 people, or that was the census in 2006. It's the capital of the eastern region of Libya called Cyrenaica. And it's a politically very important part of Libya, and because it is so economically strategic, and it's a port city, so basically the oil shipments go out from there, and it's a very important part of Libya. And it was also one of the flashpoints where the February 2011 protests started that set off the NATO invasion that ended up in the overthrow of Gaddafi's government and the murder of Gaddafi. And of course, we all remember Hillary Clinton getting the message about Gaddafi being killed, and her famous "we came, we saw, he died," and after that pronouncement, the mission accomplished, as it were, to put the bow on the present for the NATO powers. Libya basically disappeared from the corporate media radar. Not surprisingly, as we see with all of these imperialist interventions around the world, once the main mission objective has been accomplished, who cares about these people we were supposedly defending by dropping bombs on top of them? So that was kind of the kind of denouement of the whole Libya operation until September of 2012, and it was September 11th, 2012 specifically, in the evening, when about 150 gunmen, identified as being members of Ansar al-Sharia, which is an al-Qaeda-affiliated group, arrived at the diplomatic mission in Benghazi, which is sometimes kind of liberally referred to as a consulate, but it was really just a building that was housing the U.S. State Department contingent there, including Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens. Now, on the night of September 11th, 2012, these gunmen arrive at the consulate, the mission, around 9:40 p.m. and they begin attacking. They're an armed group, and they begin attacking the diplomatic mission. And about 40 minutes later, at around 10:20 p.m., we have a contingent coming to the rescue of the people there at the diplomatic mission from a nearby CIA annex that was about 1 mile away. And this contingent fights off and holds off the gunmen for about an hour before taking the survivors back with them to that CIA annex about a mile away. The gunmen follow them there and continue the fighting. The fighting continues on into the early hours of the morning. And when all is said and done, 2 U.S. diplomatic personnel, including Ambassador Stevens, are dead, and 2 security personnel, including basically 2, both ex and Navy SEALs who were CIA security contractors there at the CIA annex, were also dead. So 4 people in total. And At the time, of course, this was just 2 months before the 2012 presidential election. So obviously, politically, a very important, sensitive issue. You know, what did the commander in chief know? When did he know it? How did they respond? Were they prepared for it? All of those types of political issues that you would expect to swirl around this. And so it became something of a political issue. And as a result, sort of seeing that whole brouhaha forming on the horizon, UN Ambassador Susan Rice made the rounds of the Sunday morning talk show circuit that weekend, basically assuring everyone that this was an offshoot of the protests that were sweeping across the region at the time as a result of a video that was posted to YouTube that was insulting the Prophet Muhammad, and it caused these Muslim riots in Egypt and other places. They said it was all part and parcel of those protests, and that was what this was all about. Eventually, of course, it came out that this had absolutely nothing to do with that. There was no protest in Benghazi. It was a coordinated attack specifically on the U.S. Diplomatic mission there. So once that came to light, the political angle of this shifted to, well, then when did the Obama administration know that this was an Al-Qaeda attack, and what were they covering up with regards to this? And it became about that because, of course, Obama campaigned heavily on him being the man who killed the corpse of Osama bin Laden, or whatever that ridiculous story we're expected to believe with there. So that became the kind of political spin towards this, and this has persisted for the last almost two years now. Sort of political back and forth with the sort of the right wing, the Republicans, saying that this is a big cover up, and they're covering up their incompetence and the bungling and Al Qaeda, ability to strike against U.S. forces and blah blah blah, and then the left wing saying, "Oh, it's just a mountain out of a molehill. There's really no there and all of that kind of stuff." So the latest news, just this past week, Judicial Watch received some FOIA documents from the State Department, and they released them. And those documents include an email from Ben Rhodes, who is a communications officer in the National Security Wing of the Obama White House. He sent an email to Rice at the time that this was all swirling around, basically telling her specifically to connect the attack to the video protests. And so this supposedly is the big smoking gun. Oh, look, they specifically were telling Rice to connect this to the video. So they were covering up that this was an Al-Qaeda attack, blah, blah, blah. So this is the big smoking gun that the Republicans were waiting for. As a result, the House Republicans are launching a new special committee to investigate this. Boehner just announced today that this committee is going ahead, and they've subpoenaed John Kerry to testify at this. So this is where this is going to at this point. And this is kind of the mainstream narrative of Benghazi and Benghazigate. But for people who have been watching this, there's a lot of smoke swirling around this issue. And while it is true that where there's smoke, there's fire, it's also true that where there's smoke, there's a smoke screen. And I think that the political wrangling over this is the smoke screen of this issue. We've got this left-right debate and to talk about, the Al-Qaeda boogeyman and all of this. But all of this really misses the point of what happened at Benghazi. And that is an absolutely fascinating story that has spilled out in drips and drabs over several months, and even from very, very mainstream sources. Even CNN back in August of last year broke the story, quote unquote, broke the story that there were dozens of CIA operatives on the ground during the Benghazi attack. In fact, CIA personnel were swarming all over Benghazi during that attack, as you might expect, there being a CIA annex just a mile away from the diplomatic mission. And this raised a lot of question marks at the time that this was being reported by CNN. And that the question of what the CIA was actually doing there started to become an issue that at least was being tentatively raised in the mainstream media. And the CIA basically refused to really say what the scope of the mandate of their mission was, what they were doing there, why they were there. And in fact, it came out that they were giving monthly polygraph tests to the CIA personnel who had knowledge of their Benghazi operation specifically, to make sure that they weren't spilling the secrets to the media. I mean, just unprecedented kind of levels of security around what the CIA were really doing there. So obviously, this is getting towards the heart of what was happening there. And there's a couple of different things that we can piece together from this, from a few different insider sources. Now, we have this coming from at least three different sources that I've seen that all corroborate each other's story. We have Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer, who some people might remember. He was a whistleblower of Able Danger, which was a program that the Pentagon was running, the Defense Intelligence Agency that supposedly identified some of the 9/11 alleged hijackers before 9/11 and all of that kind of stuff. And he wrote a book trying to blow the whistle on what he knew, that the Pentagon actually bought the entire first run of that book and destroyed it. So nothing to see there, I suppose. So that's one of the sources of this. Another is Robert Tosh Plumley, who is a former CIA contract pilot. He started with the CIA in the 50s, and he was also a whistleblower of Iran-Contra. He blew the whistle on the fact that he was running drugs out of South America and running guns into the Contras. So he was part of the blowing the whistle on that. And he's also had CIA contacts telling him about what was going on in Benghazi. We also have James and Joanne Moriarty, who were a couple of U.S. business people who were in Libya since 2007. They were there in 2011 when all of the chaos was unfolding. And they have contacts with some of the Libyan tribal chiefs and others who fed them information about what was going on in Benghazi. And all of these sources, when we start to piece the information together, we're kind of backing into this story from all of these various sources. But basically, the story is that Ambassador Stevens was killed as part of a hit because he knew about the CIA operations that were going on, supposedly, quote unquote, to secure the weapons that were floating around Libya at the time, but in reality to take those weapons and ship them to Syria via either Turkey and or Jordan and or Pakistan. All three of those have been named, but certainly the Turkish ambassador was there visiting the Benghazi diplomatic mission on the day that Stevens was killed. And the story is that Stevens was killed basically to shut him up because he was concerned about the information that he was getting about this operation, and they were scared he was going to go blow the whistle to Congress. He's killed as part of this hit, and as part of this whole operation with these gunmen that swirl around and come to the diplomatic mission and actually take part in the operation. The two, specifically those two Navy SEALs that end up dying, basically the CIA weren't just going to sit there and watch this. They actually broke the stand-down orders that they'd been given and went to the aid of these people because of the firefight that they put on at the diplomatic mission and holding off the gunmen for enough time for the military's drones to fly over and see what was happening there. So the U.S. military became aware of what was going on, and that started to kick in a whole other series of operations. So basically, U.S. AFRICOM was being alerted to what was going on, and they were getting orders not to approach Benghazi, not to give a hand to what was going on. So this starts to bring in entire other sections of the U.S. government that weren't planning to be involved in this at all. This was all supposed to be a covert operation. It spun way out of control, and those Navy SEAL CIA officers end up dying as a result of it, as a result of their efforts to try to hold off the attack. So basically, this is what was meant to be a covert hit that spun way out of control, and as a result, now it's being spun off into this left-right political charade as a way of covering up what this was really about at base. And along those lines, I mean, there are several different pieces that we can connect from this, including, of course, the fact that it's been widely reported now that somehow, magically, imagine that, the Syrian rebels, the terrorists, really, the terrorist insurgents in Syria, somehow or other managed to get these Stingers anti-aircraft missiles and other incredibly advanced military weapons technology. Where did they get them from? Oh, that's right, the security operation in Benghazi to secure the Libyan stashes. So that's been confirmed from that angle. And then there's just other bizarre aspects of this story that play into this, including a report from May of last year that came out that the U.S. State Department had hired a group to be part of the security for that diplomatic mission in Benghazi, the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, which it turns out, even on their own Facebook page, had posted pictures of themselves flying an Al-Qaeda flag. This was the group the U.S. State Department was literally paying to provide security for the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi. Just craziness like that. And then I'll throw in one other piece of assorted craziness. as just another piece of this puzzle. You might remember Paula Broadwell, who was, of course, the mistress of then CIA chief David Petraeus when he went down in a blaze of glory for his dalliances. She happened to let it slip in a little speech that she was making shortly before the whole Petraeus affair, literally affair, came to light. That they were holding Libyan militia members prisoner at the CIA annex there in Benghazi, and they weren't allowed to tell anyone that because it was not only completely illegal, but of course Obama, when he came into office, one of the things, hope and change. Oh, we're going to stop the CIA black sites. Of course, that's over. We're done with that. So she was saying there was a CIA black site operating there. The CIA annex was actually holding prisoners in contravention to U.S. law. So that's just another part of what was going on there.
Hey. All
of this swirling around, bits and pieces of it coming out in the mainstream. As I say, CNN reporting in August of last year about the CIA's presence there on the ground, and then following up with the stories about the polygraph tests, etc. And another aspect of the smokescreen, earlier this week, we had The Blaze reporting. Of course, Glenn Beck's The Blaze, reporting about the CIA and what they were doing in Benghazi. And The Blaze is trying to make the case that what the CIA was doing was providing the Libyan rebels, quote unquote, the Libyan insurgents, with weapons during the civil war that was going on there prior to Benghazi. And what happened is that operation got out of control. These weapons got out of the hands of the people they were meant to go to, and they ended up in the hands of these al-Qaeda militants. And that's the kind of scandal of Benghazi, according to The Blaze, which I think you'll see only kind of tangentially doesn't really even touch the real scandal. Right. But it gave the CIA a chance this week to come out and say, the CIA has never had an effort to arm the rebels in Libya, and that had nothing to do with what was going on in Libya anyway. There was a NATO air campaign that changed the course of the Libyan conflict, and the story implies the U.S. government was to blame for the attacks in Benghazi, and we were not responsible for this, blah, blah, blah. So the CIA has issued their official denial of the claims that aren't really the pertinent claims. They've issued this non-denial denial of something that's tangential to the whole story. So just a complete cluster something or other that's swirling around this, with all of this CIA involvement and all of these whistleblowers coming out about this. And yet the only thing that gets reported on is the fact that, they covered up, they knew it was an al-Qaeda attack. So I think it's just another example of the fact that just scratch the surface, and fascinating story underneath, but over top they put this ridiculous left-right political smokescreen on top of it.
Wow. What a tangled web is weaved, right? I guess look, we've only got about 6 or 7 minutes before the end of this segment, and then we're if we can keep you for an after show, James, because you are a wealth of information. I got to say, I asked you for an overview, and you gave me one.
Sorry, I went a little long there.
I mean, no, that's great. I've just been sitting here listening to this thinking, wow, that's ridiculous, because whenever I see this kind of stuff, I think of, okay, it's very complex, right? There are a lot of different facets, but I really question the motivation of all of those involved, whether it is the CIA or the commander-in-chief. What is it they are all trying to achieve? What ends are they going after? James, I mean, does this boil down to something as simple as oil, or what, or perhaps global dominance over the petrodollar? I mean, what is the motivation that ties into this kind of complex web?
That's a good question, because I guess it goes to how far kind of down the hole you want to go. I mean, I think at the first level of analysis, what this scandal is really about is the illegal weapons shipments and trades and the illegal weapons deals that still continue to go on to supply and to fund and to arm the militants, the terrorists in other countries for other purposes. Very, very, very reminiscent of Iran-Contra. I mean, this is a very, I mean, it's not the same players, and it's not the same deals being made, but we're seeing, weapons being shipped from one place to another in order to benefit, one or another group, and the deals that are being made with the Al-Qaeda linked groups that are supposedly the enemy, but we're going to fund and supply and arm them in one country because we want them to go against that country's government. So a lot of that kind of global geopolitics machinations that go on behind the scenes in something like this. At the further level of analysis, well, why do they bothered doing this? I mean, why are they trying to undermine? Why did they overthrow Gaddafi? Why are they trying to overthrow Assad? I think it is part of a coordinated agenda that's going on in the Middle East that at this point it is really about destabilizing the Middle East, specifically when we're talking about the Syrian context, to initiate sectarian fighting, Sunni Shia, to basically exacerbate that split and to make sure that these people are at each other's throats, exactly in line with policy papers and other things that have been openly written about on behalf of not only the U.S. but also Israel for decades. They've talked about their desire to basically keep the Middle East divided and at each other's throats so that no particular force can come up as a dominant force in the region that would challenge the sort of American-Israeli hegemony of the region, and we see that working perfectly because, of course, Syria was one of the natural allies of Iran, which, all things being equal, with Iraq being divided and taken off the table by the U.S. forces, would be the naturally dominant player in the region, but they are not because of the way that this whole situation is playing out, and basically the Sunnis are being undermined through a lot of different operations that are going on right now.
I tend to think more of incentives to try to figure this kind of stuff out. You know, I mean, if you are a board member of Lockheed Martin and you want to see the success of your company, which is heavily invested into a military-industrial complex, I could see certainly some motivation for trying to foment that kind of violence abroad in order to further your business interests, right? And this is, you know, I mean, James, I'll be honest with you, I'm really not into a lot of conspiracy stuff. You know, it's I've said here before on this show, that's really not my, you know, it's not really my bag, man.
I was just going to say, Ethan. I was just going to say, like what you just said there. People could say that is conspiracy. These people are patriots. They're not out to make a buck. They're out to make America safe. Ethan,
right?
Come on.
But I mean, in the 2 minutes we have left, James, I think would you agree with me though that there really is some very strong reason to look at that sort of incentive path, the military-industrial complex, perhaps exacerbating this problem that may be tied in with geopolitical sort of I could potentially rule my corner of the world, kind of that kind of stuff too. Like, does it tie together?
Of course it does. And I think that it's really what group we're looking at analyzing. And I think there are a lot of, I mean, obviously something like this can't come together without the coordinated action of people in a lot of different industries for a lot of different motives, including, of course, the weapons manufacturers who obviously have their natural incentive in fomenting war and destruction anywhere in the globe. It's all the same, moolah in the end for them. So obviously that incentive exists on that level. And I think that to a certain extent, it would be very surprising to me if people who were at the upper levels of the board level of some of the major contractors who are deeply embedded in that military-industrial complex don't know about the types of things that are done under the table, wink and a nod, but they're not, of course, involved in the operational details of something like what happened in Benghazi. That's completely, I mean, they don't need to know about that, and I'm sure, they don't for the most part. So I think it's a lot compartmentalized, and of course, the operation of things like this are done by a select group. Again, when we say the CIA is a huge, sprawling organization, and it doesn't mean every single person. In fact, it does mean that every single person doesn't know what's going on, even what the person they're working with is necessarily working on because of the compartmentalization. So it only requires certain people in certain positions to get certain operations with certain winks and a nod and under the table handshakes, and every single layer of that hierarchy has different people involved for different reasons, including, of course, the profit motive is there at one level for the military-industrial players.
Yeah, no, you follow that incentive path, and I tell you come up with some creepy stuff. We're going to be back right after the music here with more with James Corbett. We're going to talk a little bit more about voluntarism. I wanted to get to that, but my God, there's so much on Benghazi, that kind of stuff. Of course, remember to check out CorbettReport.com. That's CorbettReport.com for all of James's stuff. You can catch the after show that's coming right up here at edandethan.com. Thanks again to everybody on Liberty Express. This is Ed and Ethan.